Hello and welcome to Finex Insights, where we turn complex data into clarity through stories. Today's story begins with a striking statistic that has defined Ghana's financial history. Since 1957, the banking landscape has been a tale of two very different survival rates. From independence till date, Ghana has experienced 14 major bank collapses. However, look at the disparity. 12 out of those 14 banks were local Ghanaian institutions. Now, all banks operated under the exact same conditions, the same regulator, the same licensing requirements, and the same business environment. So it leaves us with a haunting question. If the playing field was level, why did collapses concentrate so heavily among just one group? Why were our local banks the ones taking most of the hits? And that is exactly what we are here to uncover. The why behind the collapse of Ghana's banks. To find those answers, we have to go back to where the cracks first appeared. Our story begins with the first wave of collapse between 1991 and 2000. The first wave actually began with two major foreign players. The Bank of Credit and Commerce was the first. BCCI entered Ghana in 1978 as a major player, but its story ended in disaster just over a decade later when it collapsed globally in 1991 due to massive fraud by its parent company. Then came Meridian Biao. They arrived in 1992, but their success was short-lived due to trouble abroad. The bank's downfall in 1995 was due to reckless exposure of its own funds to its failing international parent company. Now, if you've been following the numbers I shared at the start, you'd realize that these are the only two major foreign bank collapses in Ghana's entire history. Every single failure that follows this point tells a very different, more localized story. The final two collapses of this era were in the year 2000. We saw the simultaneous fall of two local institutions, the Bank of Housing and Construction and the Ghana Cooperative Bank. Their downfall wasn't a coincidence. Both banks were crippled by the infamous A-Life supermarket scandal. In a shocking breach of trust, management at both institutions colluded with the retail chain to bypass lending limits, issuing massive uncollateralized loans that could not be repaid. So, looking at this first era, a sharp contrast emerges. On one hand, we see the foreign banks. Their failures were driven by external shocks. On the other hand, our local banks tell a different story. Their collapse was due to internal lending practices. As we move forward, keep this distinction in mind. During and after the period of these early collapses, Ghana's banking landscape continued to evolve. There was the arrival and expansion of many more foreign banks. From Nigeria, we saw the arrival of banks like UBA, Zenith Bank, GT Bank, and Access Bank. South Africa also brought in Stanbic Bank and First National Bank. This era also saw the rise of a new breed of ambitious local banks like UT Bank, Fidelity Bank in the 2000s, and the likes of Premium Bank, Capital Bank, and GM Bank in the early 2010s. Fast forward to 2017. On the surface, the industry looked crowded and competitive, with 36 universal banks in operation. At this point, the split was nearly even. 19 were local banks and 17 were foreign ones. But behind the gleaming glass towers, the foundation was rotting. When the new management of the Bank of Ghana took office in early 2017, they inherited a banking system in crisis. The grim reality was laid bare by an asset quality review, which was a deep dive audit first conducted in 2015 and updated in 2016. This technical assessment revealed a sector riddled with deep holes and hidden debts. And so, the stage was set for the most aggressive financial intervention in Ghana's history, the banking cleanup exercise of 2017 to 2019. The results of that audit were catastrophic. Based on the findings, the Bank of Ghana took the unprecedented step of revoking the licenses of these 10 banks. One by one, the names fell: Capital Bank, UT Bank, uniBank, the Royal Bank, Beige Bank, then came Sovereign Bank, Construction Bank, Heritage Bank, Premium Bank, and uniBank. 10 institutions. All 10 of them were local Ghanaian banks. This brings us back to the haunting question we asked at the start. These banks share the same economy, the same customers, and the same regulator as their foreign counterparts. Yet, while the banking sector was being dismantled, only local banks were affected. What was happening behind the closed doors of our local banks that made them so fragile? To understand the cause of this massive collapse, you will look into specific financial holes in these banks and highlight 3 distinct patterns. First on our list is Pattern A, related party lending. Now, banking regulations strictly limit how much a bank can lend to its own directors and shareholders. And the Bank of Ghana set that limit at 10%. However, data from the Bank of Ghana shows that most of the collapsed banks ignored that limit. Take uniBank. Shareholders and related parties diverted 5.3 billion cedis to themselves. That single figure constituted 75% of the bank's total assets. At uniBank, depositor funds worth over 760 million Ghana cedis were transferred to Gold Coast Fund Management, and $60 million was also transferred to International Business Solutions. Now, both companies were sister companies of uniBank. The Royal Bank also moved over 161 million cedis through structures designed specifically to bypass regulatory limits. Meanwhile, Premium Bank saw 37.2% of its loan book exposed to its own insiders. Now, that's nearly 4 times the Bank of Ghana's limit of 10%. So the pattern is clear. Money meant for safekeeping was being siphoned off to build the owner's private business empires. Pattern A was about moving money out. Pattern B is about money that was never really there. Take the Beige Bank. According to the Bank of Ghana, the bank reported a fresh injection of over 163 million in capital. But findings showed that the bank had taken its own existing funds, moved them to an affiliate asset management company, and then cycled them back into the bank, calling it new capital. It was a loop of the same money, creating the appearance of growth where there was none. Then we have Sovereign Bank. Sovereign Bank obtained their license using funds secretly transferred from another bank, that's Capital Bank, to make it look like shareholders had paid for shares. For Construction Bank, investigations revealed that their initial minimum paid-up capital was funded by loans obtained from NIB Bank and uniBank to pose as shareholder capital. In short, all these banks were licensed to operate with money they didn't actually have. But what happens when you combine reckless lending with fake capital? It leads directly to the mathematical nightmare you see here. Look at the non-performing loans on the left. At uniBank, a nearly impossible 89% of their loans were not being paid back. At the Royal Bank, it was 79%. This is a direct result of pattern A, when you lend to insiders and related parties who have no intention or ability to pay it back. And because their original capital was fictitious, their capital adequacy ratios didn't just drop. They inverted to negative. Think of capital adequacy ratios as a safety buffer. When loans aren't repaid, this buffer is what helps banks absorb losses without crashing. And for a healthy bank, it's supposed to be a positive ratio. But these banks on our left didn't just run out of this buffer. They plummeted into negative. When a bank has no real capital and its loans aren't being repaid, it eventually loses the ability to pay its depositors. And this creates a desperate need for cash, leading to pattern C, the abuse of liquidity support. Between 2013 and 2016, the Bank of Ghana provided liquidity support to UT Bank and Capital Bank because they could no longer meet the withdrawal demands of their depositors. This support totaled a massive 1.48 billion Ghana cedis. But instead of using this state-funded aid to stabilize the banks, the owners diverted these emergency funds into their own private investments and related party businesses. Now, these three patterns reflect how authority was structured, who could override controls, and whether anyone could stop risky behavior. So the common thread that explains how most local banks were steered into collapse, while others stayed the course, is the strength or failure of governance. Governance as the framework of rules and relationships that direct a bank. Governance as a mechanism that ensures that the private interests of those in power never supersede the public trust of those who deposit their life savings. So yes, governance was the boundary between a sustainable bank and a fragile one. Looking ahead, the question is no longer one of if local banks can survive, but rather, how should local banks be structured so that capital is real, oversight supersedes ownership, and boards are independent? Because the data shows that collapse followed unchecked power and survival followed controls. This has been a Finex Insights data story. Thank you for watching till the end. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe. See you in our next one.